The desert planet of Ralvek stretched out in every direction, a wasteland of jagged rocks and cracked sands under the relentless heat of twin suns. Terran's boots sank into the shifting earth with each step, his eyes squinting against the harsh light as he scanned the horizon. Out here where the stars felt as distant as the whispers of civilization, it was easy to get lost. But Terran wasn't one to lose his way. He had survived too many barren worlds traversed planets where life was a gamble, and today he had his sights set on a prize worth risking it all. The rumors about Ralvek had caught his attention back on Foran, which was a rough outpost at the edge of civilized space. The whispers had grown louder tales of an energy source unlike anything else in the galaxy. Hellion, they called it. According to the stories, it was a substance capable of bending reality itself, drawing power from the very fabric of existence. The traders claimed it could make a man rich enough to buy a moon, or powerful enough to topple empires. Terran didn't know if he believed half of it, but in his line of work, the chance of finding something this valuable was worth every risk. Ralvek wasn't a planet for tourists or even casual travelers. The few settlements that existed were sparse, abandoned to sandstorms and the occasional scavenger. Terran had barely encountered another soul since he landed, and that suited him just fine. He preferred it that way. As he moved across the dunes, a shimmer appeared on the horizon, a flash of something that didn't belong in this empty landscape. He slowed, instinctively bringing a hand to his holstered blaster. Through the distorted waves of heat, he could just make out the shape of a figure, lone and unmoving, facing in his direction. Terran approached slowly, every muscle tensed, ready for a fight or flight. But as he drew nearer, his suspicions gave way to confusion. The figure was a woman, draped in silver fabric that flowed with the faint breeze. Her skin was a mesmerizing shade of blue, marked with intricate, silvery designs that caught the light. She stood still, watching him with an intensity that was both unsettling and captivating. "Strange to see a lone human so far from home," she said, her voice soft, as if the desert had somehow muted it. Terran kept his hand close to his blaster. "I could say the same to you. Not every day you see a blue-skinned beauty on a desert rock like Ralvek." He noted the way her gaze never faltered, unbothered by his attempt at humor. She took a step closer, her dark eyes scanning him as if seeing something beyond his exterior. "I am Lyra, and I think I know why you're here." Terran. The casual mention of his name sent a chill up his spine. He had told no one his real name since arriving on Ralvek. He gave her a half-smile, masking his surprise. "News travels fast." "I see." Lyra held his gaze, unflinching. "The sands here don't need words to tell stories. They carry whispers, hints of destiny." Her expression remained calm, almost as if she had been waiting for him. Terran tried to shrug off her cryptic words, his eyes shifting from her to the landscape around them. "Look, I don't know about destiny or whatever it is you're talking about. I'm here for something simple, something I've heard might be worth my time. They say this planet holds a substance called helion. Know anything about it?" Lyra's expression darkened, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "Helion is not something to be taken lightly. Human. It is powerful. Yes, but it is also dangerous, deadly. Even those who try to control it often end up destroyed." Terran's interest only grew. This was why he'd come. After all, power, danger, the unknown, it was in his blood to chase these things, to court risk for a taste of the impossible. "I'll take my chances. Why don't you lead me to it? And we'll see who ends up with the upper hand." For a moment, Lyra studied him in silence. Her dark eyes held a glint of something he couldn't place. Pity, maybe, or perhaps admiration. Whatever it was, it didn't sit well with him. He was used to dealing with people who feared or respected him, not ones who looked at him like they knew something he didn't. Finally, she nodded, her silver-draped form turning to face the distant mountains. "Very well. But remember, once we reach Helion, there is no turning back. Its power binds those who seek it. It can consume you before you even realize it has begun." He chuckled, following as she started walking. "Sounds like a challenge. I've faced worse." They moved in silence, Terran's mind racing as he kept pace with her. The landscape around them grew rougher, the sand giving way to sharp rocks and narrow ridges. Terran couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led somewhere ancient. The air felt heavier, the atmosphere thick with some unseen energy. As they reached the base of a towering ridge, Lyra stopped and turned to face him. Beyond this point, Helion's presence becomes potent. It may feel like it's calling to you, but remember that it is not a friend. Helion serves no one but itself. Terran gave her a hard look, his curiosity getting the better of him. How do you know so much about it? A sad smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Because I, too, once sought its power, and I learned, as you will, that Helion does not easily forgive those who touch it. Without another word, she turned and led him through a narrow pass that opened into a small valley. At the center of the valley, nestled between two jagged rocks, was a crystalline structure, glowing with an otherworldly purple light. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, filling the air with a strange hum. Terran's breath caught in his throat. This was it. Helion. The rumors hadn't done it justice. Is it alive? He whispered, unable to take his eyes off the strange crystal. In a way, Lyra replied, her voice soft. It senses those who seek it, those who wish to wield its power. She placed a hand on his arm, stopping him before he could step any closer. Are you truly ready for this? He looked at her, and for the first time, he felt a sliver of doubt, but he pushed it aside. He hadn't come all this way to back down. Yes, I'm ready. Lyra released his arm, her face unreadable. Then may Helion spare you. As he reached out toward the glowing crystal, a surge of energy pulsed through his body, and the ground beneath him trembled. In that moment, Terran knew he was dealing with something beyond his understanding, a force that could either elevate him or consume him whole. And yet, he couldn't turn back. As Terran's hand touched the crystal, a surge of power shot through him, unlike anything he'd ever felt. It wasn't just energy, it was raw, untamed life itself. The force knocked him back a step, his heart pounding as if it might burst. Every nerve in his body came alive, a mixture of pain and ecstasy flooding his senses. Lyra's voice cut through the fog of sensation. Helion tests those who seek it. If you can withstand its call, you may have a chance. But only a chance. Terran braced himself, willing his body to stand against the onslaught. What does it want? Lyra's dark eyes watched him intently. Helion seeks those who respect it and fear it, those who will not wield its power carelessly. It knows who is worthy and who is not. The words barely registered as Terran fought to control the wild energy surging through him. Images flashed before his eyes, strange worlds, ancient symbols, fragments of something vast and cosmic. Each vision hit him like a wave, disorienting and overwhelming. Just as he thought he couldn't hold on, the energy pulsing through him slowed, shifting from chaotic force to something almost cooperative. The pain dulled, replaced by a steady rhythm that matched his heartbeat. The crystal seemed to recognize him, acknowledge his resilience. He let out a shaky breath, looking to Lyra. I think it accepted me. Lyra nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. Few make it this far. You may be one of the first humans to survive an encounter with Helion, despite the dizziness. Terran felt exhilarated. He'd been to the galaxy's darkest corners, faced creatures and criminals alike, but nothing had ever compared to this. He wasn't just holding power. He was part of it now, linked in a way he didn't yet understand. But as the thrill subsided, questions filled his mind. So, now what? What's this power good for? Lyra turned, casting her gaze toward the distant dunes. Helion's abilities are unique. It grants power over matter, energy, even perception. But if misused, it will devour its host. Terran's excitement dimmed. Devour? No one mentioned that part. Her gaze softened, almost pitying. Helion's strength is not without its dangers. That's why I brought you here, to test your will, to see if you were strong enough. But even I don't fully control it. I am only its keeper. He felt a chill despite the desert heat. Why choose me? Why bring a stranger here, knowing what could happen? Lyra's expression turned serious. Because you seek what few understand. You see life as an adventure, a series of risks worth taking. Helion calls to those who embrace that unknown. And, perhaps, because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself once. The faint vulnerability in her tone surprised him. She was mysterious, guarded, Yet there was a sincerity there that made him trust her more than he would have expected. Before he could respond, the air around them shifted. The silence of the valley was broken by a faint rumble, and a low hum echoed from the mountains. Lyra's face paled. "They're here," she murmured. Terran tensed, instinctively reaching for his blaster. "Who's here?" "Those who hunt Helion. The Syndicate. They've been tracking me for months, waiting for the right moment." Her voice was tense, her gaze darting to the entrance of the valley. "They can sense it now. They won't stop until they have it, or destroy everything in their path." Terran's mind raced. He'd heard of the Syndicate, a ruthless network of mercenaries and criminals who dealt in forbidden tech and rare artifacts. They didn't negotiate, and they didn't forgive. "What do we do?" he asked, pulse quickening. Lyra's eyes hardened. "We run. Helion's power will protect us, but only if we move quickly. Follow me." Without hesitation, she took off, leading him along a narrow path that cut through the jagged rocks. He followed close behind, the crystal's power thrumming in his veins, sharpening his senses. The world around him seemed clearer, more alive, each footfall on the rocky terrain echoing as though amplified. As they navigated the treacherous path, Terran caught sight of shadows moving in the distance, figures in sleek armor, weapons glinting in the sunlight. "Syndicate hunters. They're closing in," he whispered, heart pounding. Lyra didn't look back. "Helion has granted you strength. Use it. Focus on your surroundings. Let the power guide you." Terran glanced at his hand, feeling the pulsing energy radiating beneath his skin. He wasn't entirely sure what she meant, but he trusted her. He focused, letting the power flow, and as he did, his perception seemed to sharpen even more. He could see the smallest details, the path ahead, the rocks, the Syndicate agents weaving through the valley. With a surge of confidence, he quickened his pace, matching Lyra's speed as they maneuvered through the narrow pass. The Syndicate hunters were closing in, but for the first time in his life, Terran felt a strange sense of control, a connection to something greater than himself. They rounded a bend, and before them was a steep cliff that dropped into a hidden canyon. Lyra stopped, glancing back at the approaching hunters, then at him. "Do you trust me?" He barely hesitated. "Do I have a choice?" Without another word, she took his hand and pulled him over the edge. They fell, plunging into the depths of the canyon, but instead of panic, he felt calm. Helion's power wrapped around them, slowing their descent as they landed softly on the canyon floor below. Lyra released his hand, her expression serious. "We're not safe yet. They'll find us eventually, but Helion has given you strength, Terran, and I suspect you're going to need it." The canyon was darker than Terran expected. Shadows clung to the walls, cast by towering cliffs on either side. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft crunch of their footsteps against the dusty ground. The cool air was a welcome change from the blazing heat above, but Terran's heart was still racing. They weren't alone. Somewhere up above, the Syndicate agents were tracking them, closing in. "Where does this canyon lead?" he asked, glancing at Lyra as they moved swiftly along the narrow path. "There's a hidden passage further ahead," she replied, her voice low. "If we reach it, it'll take us beneath the Syndicate's sensors. They'll think we vanished." As they walked, Terran couldn't ignore the strange sensation growing within him. Helion's energy buzzed beneath his skin, an almost electric feeling that seemed to pulse in sync with his heartbeat. Every sense felt heightened, the cool dampness of the canyon, the distant echo of footsteps, even Lyra's steady breathing beside him. It was as if Helion was amplifying everything, pushing him to the edge of awareness. "Lyra," he whispered, glancing at his hand where the crystal's faint glow still lingered. "Is this normal?" "I can feel Helion's power running through me. It's like it's alive." Lyra nodded, her eyes flicking to his hand. "Helion chooses its bearers carefully. You're connected to it now. The energy you feel is its way of bonding with you. But be cautious. Helion's power can overwhelm those who aren't careful." The warning settled in his mind. But before he could respond, a distant shout echoed from above. The Syndicate agents had found their trail. "They're coming," he said, tightening his grip on the blaster at his side. "How far to the passage?" Lyra's gaze sharpened as she pointed ahead. Just around the next bend. But we'll have to move fast. They broke into a run, their footsteps echoing against the canyon walls. The syndicate hunters were close now. Taryn could hear the faint hum of their equipment, the low murmur of voices, the clicking of weapons being readied. As they rounded the bend, Taryn's heart dropped. The path was blocked by a jagged rock slide, debris piled high and jagged stones blocking the way forward. Great, he muttered, looking for a way around. Now what? Lyra's gaze didn't waver. She lifted her hand, a strange determination flickering in her eyes. Trust me. Taryn, Hellion will show us the way. She extended her hand toward the rock slide, and the crystal around her neck began to glow, its light casting eerie shadows against the stones. A low hum filled the air, and Taryn felt the power in his own crystal respond, pulsing in sync with hers. Slowly, the rocks began to shift, grinding against each other as if moved by an invisible force. A narrow path opened up through the debris, barely wide enough for them to slip through. Go, Lyra urged, motioning for him to move ahead. Taryn didn't hesitate. He ducked into the passage, squeezing through the narrow opening with Lyra close behind. As they emerged on the other side, he glanced back just in time to see the rocks slide back into place, sealing off the path behind them. Impressive, he said, breathing hard as they continued forward. Is that Hillion's doing? Lyra nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. It responds to those who respect it. We may just stand a chance against the syndicate yet. They continued down the canyon, moving quickly as the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. But Taryn knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The syndicate wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, and Helion's power was more valuable than anything they'd ever sought. As they reached a wide clearing in the canyon, Lyra slowed, glancing around as if sensing something. Taryn followed her gaze, tensing as he spotted movement at the edge of the clearing. Figures in dark armor emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised. Syndicate agents. Stay behind me, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Helion will protect us, but only if we act wisely. Taryn didn't argue. He could feel the crystal's energy pulsing, almost as if it were waiting, ready to be unleashed. He took a step back, letting Lyra move forward. One of the syndicate agents raised his weapon, a cruel smile twisting his face. End of the line. Traitor, hand over Helion, and we might let you live. Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she extended her hand, her crystal flaring with light. The syndicate agents hesitated, their expressions faltering as the energy from the crystal seemed to radiate outward, creating a protective barrier around them. Taryn felt a surge of strength as his own crystal responded, amplifying the barrier. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that as long as Helion's power flowed through him, he was untouchable. The lead agent sneered, his gaze narrowing. So, the little alien thinks she can take us all on. Let's see how long that shield lasts. With a flick of his hand, he signaled his men to attack. Plasma bolts filled the air, striking the barrier with explosive force. But the energy held, absorbing each impact as Taryn and Lyra stood their ground. Now, Lyra whispered, her voice filled with fierce determination. Focus, Taryn. Hellion's power is yours. Trust it. Taryn closed his eyes, feeling the energy flow through him, guiding him. He raised his blaster, channeling the power of the crystal as he aimed. When he fired, the blast was stronger, brighter, cutting through the syndicate's defenses with ease. One by one, the agents fell, their weapons clattering to the ground as they scrambled to escape the onslaught. In minutes, the clearing was empty, the syndicate driven back by the combined force of Helion's energy and Taryn's newfound strength. When it was over, Taryn lowered his blaster, breathing hard as the power faded, leaving him with a sense of exhilaration and exhaustion. Lyra turned to him, a look of pride in her eyes. You've done well. Taryn, Helion has accepted you, but this is only the beginning. The syndicate will regroup, and they will return with greater force. We must be ready. He nodded, feeling a new sense of purpose settle over him. He'd come to this barren desert for a simple job, but now he was part of something much larger, something that could change the fate of the galaxy. Then let's make sure they regret coming after us, he said, his voice steady. Lyra's smile was faint but filled with determination. Together, They turned and disappeared into the shadows, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The air in the canyon felt different, sharper, filled with an undercurrent of tension as Terran and Lyra pressed forward. With each step, the pulse of Helion's energy grew stronger, resonating between them like an unbreakable thread. They'd driven the Syndicate agents back, but Lyra had warned him. It wouldn't be long before they returned, armed and prepared. A faint glimmer caught Terran's eye, and he looked down to see Helion's light reflecting off the walls of the narrow path ahead. Lyra paused, her gaze fixed on the passage before them. "This way," she said, leading him deeper into the labyrinth of rocks. "There's a hidden chamber up ahead. It's a place where the ancient keepers of Helion hid from the Syndicate centuries ago. If we reach it, we might have a chance to recharge Helion's energy fully." "Recharge?" Terran asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought Helion's power was infinite." "It is," she said, giving him a knowing look. "But even power requires guidance. Helion responds to intention, to purpose. The chamber enhances its energy, aligns it with whoever holds it. It's our best chance." Terran nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle on him. As they pushed forward, the walls of the canyon began to widen, revealing a massive open space, with stone pillars rising from the ground like ancient sentinels. Symbols were etched across the stones, strange glyphs that glowed faintly, casting an eerie blue light over the chamber. At the center of the chamber was an altar, smooth and polished, with a crystal pedestal that looked as though it had been untouched for centuries. Helion's energy flared in his chest, urging him forward. "Place your crystal on the pedestal," Lyra instructed, her gaze intense. "The altar will enhance Helion's energy, but it will also bind it to you. You'll become its keeper, its protector." Terran hesitated, a strange feeling twisting in his gut. He glanced at Lyra, her expression unreadable. She'd led him here, taught him about Helion's power, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she wasn't telling him. "Lyra, why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice low. "What's your connection to all this?" She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of resolve and sorrow. "The Syndicate took everything from my people. Our homes, our history, our lives. Helion is the last remnant of our heritage, a weapon they've been trying to claim for centuries. But they don't understand it. They think it's just a source of power, something they can use and control. But Helion is more than that." Her voice softened, and for a moment, Terran saw the weight of her past etched across her face. "If they succeed, if they get their hands on Helion, they'll use it to dominate everything in their path. My people believed Helion was a gift, a responsibility. If you take on this role, you'll be bound to protect it, forever." He looked down at the crystal in his hand, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. He understood now. This was more than just a job, more than an escape from his life as a drifter. This was a commitment, one that would change him, shape him. Without another word, he stepped forward and placed the crystal on the pedestal. The chamber lit up instantly, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter as Helion's energy surged through him, filling every corner of his being. It was like fire and ice all at once, a power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Lyra stepped back, watching as the energy flowed from the crystal into Terran. She closed her eyes, murmuring words he didn't understand, and the symbols on the wall shifted, glowing in response to her chant. Then, suddenly, the ground trembled, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. Terran looked up to see shadows moving at the entrance of the chamber. Syndicate agents, dozens of them, had arrived, their weapons drawn, their expressions fierce. Lyra's eyes snapped open, and her gaze hardened. "They're here. They must have tracked us." Terran could feel Helion's energy radiating through him, an unyielding force urging him to stand his ground. The Syndicate leader stepped forward, a smirk spreading across his face as he regarded Terran and Lyra with cold, calculating eyes. "You've led us on quite the chase," he sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "But it ends here. Hand over Helion, and maybe we'll let you live." Terran clenched his fists, feeling the crystal's energy hum in response. He could see the determination in Lyra's eyes, the silent plea that urged him not to back down. "Helion isn't something you can just take," Terran said, his voice steady. "You have no idea what it really is. The leader laughed. A harsh, grating sound. We know enough. Enough to harness its power and make it ours. Without warning, he raised his hand, signaling his men to attack. Plasma bolts filled the air, lighting up the chamber in bursts of blue and white. But as the first shot neared him, Terran raised his hand, and the energy from Helion surged outward, forming a shimmering barrier that deflected the attack. The Syndicate soldiers hesitated, their confidence faltering as they realized the power Terran now wielded. But the leader's gaze hardened, and he barked a command. His men regrouping, weapons raised. Lyra stepped forward, her own crystal glowing with a fierce light. Together, Terran, Helion's power flows through both of us. We can protect it, but only if we trust each other. He nodded, his resolve solidifying. They stood side by side, their combined energy radiating outward as the Syndicate soldiers advanced. Plasma blasts and energy waves collided with the barrier, sending sparks flying, but Helion's power held strong. Terran felt the energy thrumming through him, guiding his every movement. He and Lyra moved in perfect harmony, deflecting attacks, sending waves of energy that threw their enemies back, their movements fluid and unstoppable. As the battle raged on, Terran could see the fear growing in the Syndicate's eyes. They hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated that two beings, bonded by Helion, could wield such overwhelming power. Finally, with one last surge of energy, Terran and Lyra unleashed a forceful wave, sending the Syndicate soldiers scattering. The leader staggered back, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. "This isn't over," he snarled, clutching his side. "You can't hide forever. The Syndicate will never stop hunting you." Terran stepped forward, his gaze unyielding. "Maybe, but we'll be ready." The leader retreated, his men following him in haste, leaving the chamber in silence. Terran took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Helion's power settle within him. The battle had been won, but he knew it was only the beginning. The Syndicate would return, but this time, he and Lyra would be prepared. He looked over at Lyra, who gave him a small, approving nod. "You did well, Terran. Helion has chosen wisely." He smiled, feeling a strange sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. Together, they walked out of the chamber, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them, knowing that as long as they held Helion's power, they could protect not only themselves, but the legacy of an entire people. The aftermath of the battle left the cavern silent, save for the low hum of Helion's energy, pulsing gently from the pedestal. Terran and Lyra stood amidst the ruins, their breathing steady, their minds buzzing with the lingering power of Helion. The victory was hard won, yet they both knew the Syndicate would regroup, returning stronger and more determined. Protecting Helion's secrets was just beginning. Terran looked to Lyra, her face softened with an expression he hadn't seen before, pride mixed with relief. "We've bought ourselves time," she murmured, stepping closer to the pedestal where the crystals still glowed faintly. "But they'll come back. Helion's power has always attracted those who seek to control it." Terran nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of the Syndicate's return, of their relentless ambition to claim Helion. "What's our next move?" he asked, his voice a steady calm, masking the weariness he felt deep within. She considered his question, her gaze fixed on the crystal's glow. "The planet has hidden Helion's secrets for centuries, but only by binding it to us can we ensure its protection." She hesitated, her hand resting just above the crystals as though she were already guarding them. "It's a responsibility that no one can carry alone." Terran felt the weight of her words, their unspoken meaning hanging in the air. Helion's power didn't just demand protectors. It demanded unity, a shared purpose stronger than individual fears or desires. And as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he felt that purpose solidify. "What would it mean to bind with Helion?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not a choice we make lightly," she answered. "To guard its power is to become a part of it, to be connected to it and to each other, as long as we live." She paused, her expression turning earnest. "Helion would become our legacy. We would be its guardians, bound by more than duty, by the bond Helion creates." Terran took a deep breath, understanding fully what this commitment entailed. Yet, his heart resonated with the choice before him. "Then let's do it. Let's protect Helion together." Without another word, they placed their hands upon the crystals, feeling the familiar warmth as Helion's energy flowed through them. Stronger now, more profound. It was as if the crystal recognized them, sensed their resolve, and answered in kind. The light grew brighter, filling the chamber with a brilliance that seemed to push back the shadows, sealing their bond with an unbreakable vow. In that moment, they felt the connection, an understanding beyond words, as if Helion itself was alive and acknowledging them. It wasn't just the power they shared, but their commitment to something greater, something they would protect with their very lives. When the light faded, they stood there, changed, yet strangely at peace. Lyra broke the silence, her voice steady, filled with purpose. They'll come again, Terran, but they'll never understand Helion the way we do. Its strength isn't in conquest but in unity. Terran nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling over him, yet bringing an odd sense of comfort. He glanced at her, his gaze softened by the trust and connection they now shared. Then let's prepare. Whatever the Syndicate throws at us, we'll face it together. Side by side, they left the chamber, stepping into the open landscape of their planet, knowing they weren't just two individuals any longer. They were guardians, united in their purpose, bound by Helion's light, and as long as they stood together, they knew they could face anything. From that day forward, Terran and Lyra watched over Helion's power, always vigilant, always ready. And though the galaxy beyond might thirst for Helion's energy, it was no match for the unbreakable bond of its two protectors, guardians of a power as ancient as the stars, and as enduring as the bond they now shared.